At 4:47 in the afternoon on July 4th, a dispatcher's radio crackled to life with a voice that sounded scared. "Hey, we're at the west tip of Horn and our bilge pump stopped working. We're sinking. Can you all please come?" The dispatcher asked if everyone on board was accounted for. The caller said yes, that call exists. It's on record, obtained through a public records request. And for weeks, nobody outside a small group of people even knew it happened. That's the strange shape of this case right now. Not one big reveal, but a slow drip of small, hard, verifiable details. A 911 call here, a GPS timestamp there, arriving weeks after the fact and quietly rewriting the story everyone thought they already understood. This week brought two of those details at once. The first is mechanical and precise. GPS data from a state agency, tracking a boat's exact movements minute by minute on the day Nolan Wells disappeared from Horn Island. The second is personal and determined. Nolan's parents sitting down face-to-face with the Jackson County District Attorney and announcing they're no longer content to simply wait on an official process. They're building one of their own, running alongside it. We're going to walk through both of these developments carefully, using only what's been confirmed through named sources and official records. Not speculation, not secondhand rumor, and not anything dressed up to look more certain than it actually is. If you're new to this channel, take a second and hit subscribe, and turn on notifications while you're at it. We're covering this case as it actually develops, verifying every claim before we bring it to you, and that means new updates as soon as the facts are confirmed. If you want to stay with this story, subscribing is the way to do that. And if you find this kind of careful fact-checked coverage valuable, tap that like button. It genuinely helps. Let's start with where this story stood before this week, because the new details only really land if you understand what was missing. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, a graduate of Ocean Springs High School, and a football player at Southwest Mississippi Community College. On July 4th, he joined a group of friends for a boat trip to Horn Island, an undeveloped barrier island off the Mississippi Gulf Coast. By the time that boat returned to the mainland that afternoon, Nolan wasn't on it. His family reported him missing that night. 2 days later, on the morning of July 6th, his body was recovered from the water near the island's shoreline. For weeks, almost everything the public knew about what happened between the boat's departure and Nolan being found in the water came from people talking. A friend's recollection here, an attorney's press conference there, a parent's Facebook post laying out one version of events. Every single one of those accounts depended, at some level, on human memory and human honesty, both of which are genuinely fallible, even in people who have absolutely nothing to hide. Memory shifts. Perspective distorts distance and timing. People misremember details under stress without ever meaning to deceive anyone. This week, for the first time, something entered the case that doesn't have that problem. CBS News obtained GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, a state agency that had access to the boat's tracking information as part of its own early involvement in the case. This data doesn't depend on anyone's memory. It's a mechanical record, generated automatically, of exactly where a specific vessel was and when. According to that data, the boat left a private dock at approximately 9:56 that morning. It arrived at Horn Island at 11:14. That's the ordinary, unremarkable start to what should have been a normal holiday outing. Nothing in those first two timestamps raises any flags at all. The data shows the boat left Horn Island at 4:31 that afternoon and returned to its original dock. And that number is worth sitting with for a second, because it lines up with something that had already been stated publicly. Ashley Cole, a judge whose son, Warren Hudson, was one of the friends on the trip, had posted on Facebook defending her son's account of that day, saying the group left the island around 4:30 due to the boat taking on water and a problem with the bilge pump. That's the same mechanical failure heard in the 911 call from earlier, the "we're sinking" call. So now we have independent technical confirmation that lines up with part of that account. The boat really did leave around the time it was said to have left, and the emergency call about a failing bilge pump really was made around that window. That's meaningful. It's the first piece of outside corroboration this particular explanation has had. But it's important to be precise about what that corroboration actually covers. because it would be easy, and wrong, to treat this as confirming everything attached to that account. The GPS data confirms a boat left the island around 4:30. It does not confirm why Nolan wasn't on it. It does not confirm what was said between him and the friends who left. It confirms one fact, a timestamp. It doesn't confirm the full story built around that timestamp. Those are two very different things, and this case has already shown what happens when a single confirmed detail gets stretched to cover claims it was never actually built to support. Here's where the data gets genuinely strange and introduces something that no account we've seen, not the sheriff's early statement, not Judge Cole's Facebook post, not any friend's interview, has mentioned at all. After returning to its home dock around 4:30, the boat didn't stay there. According to the GPS record, it went back out, traveling into a nearby waterway called Fort Bayou at around 5:52 that evening. It returned to the dock 14 minutes later at 6:06. Then, roughly an hour after that, at 7:19, the boat moved again, this time to a boat launch on Fort Bayou. From there, based on the tracking data, it appears to have been taken out of the water and transported by road to the home of the boat's owners in Biloxi. Walk through that sequence slowly because it matters. The boat gets back to its dock around 4:30 in the afternoon. About 90 minutes later, it goes out again for a short 14-minute round trip. About an hour after that, it moves a third time, this time to be pulled out of the water entirely. 3 separate movements, spanning nearly 3 hours after the boat had already returned from the island where a teenager had just been left behind. Nobody has publicly explained that sequence, not in any interview, any press conference, or any witness account reviewed so far. It's a documented, time-stamped set of movements that currently exists without any explanation attached to it at all. Now, to be fair, there are entirely innocent explanations that could account for this. Boats need fuel sometimes. Equipment gets left behind and has to be retrieved. If that bilge pump issue was serious, a short trip to check on repairs or move the boat somewhere it could be worked on before being trailered home overnight wouldn't be unusual on its own. Fort Bayou itself is a normal, navigable local waterway, not some remote or suspicious destination. A short trip there isn't automatically alarming. But an innocent explanation is not the same thing as a confirmed one. And in a case that has already been defined by unexplained gaps, a phone that came back with nothing saved on it, hours nobody can fully account for, a 13-hour delay before search efforts formally escalated, a fresh, unexplained gap in the boat's own movements is exactly the kind of detail that deserves a direct, on-record answer from whoever was actually on board during those trips. Was it just the owner, alone, dealing with mechanical issues? Was anyone else there? Did it have anything to do with Nolan at all? Or was it a completely separate errand that simply happened to fall on the same evening he was still missing? Right now, based on everything publicly available, nobody outside a small circle of people actually knows, and the public record doesn't offer an answer yet. What the Marine Resources report does offer is names, or at least roles. The report identifies the boat's owner, his mother, and one additional individual who was reportedly with Nolan that day as people who have cooperated with the investigation. That detail matters more than it might seem at first, because it's the first time an official document, rather than an attorney's public claim, has directly confirmed that an adult connected to the boat is formally part of this case. That detail also lines up, at least partially, with something Nolan's father had said earlier, that an adult had been present on the boat that day, a claim that up to this point had not been independently confirmed through any official source. This report doesn't fully verify every detail of that account, but it does move the question of adult involvement from a family member's assertion into something now sitting in an actual state agency's paperwork. It's also worth noticing that the boat owner's mother is named as cooperating. That suggests the investigation, even in this early phase, reached beyond the group of teenagers directly involved that day and into the surrounding adult family members connected to the vessel itself. That's a wider circle of cooperation than most public accounts have described up to now, and it naturally raises its own question. What did she know, or need to explain, that placed her inside this early cooperation as well? There's one more limitation worth being upfront about. The Marine Resources report ends on July 5th. the point at which the Jackson County Sheriff's Office formally took over as the lead investigating agency. Whatever follow-up questions were or weren't asked about that second and third boat trip after that handoff simply isn't captured in the document CBS News obtained, and GPS tracking on a private boat typically records the vessel's location, not who specifically was on board during each individual leg of the trip. Unless someone separately documented exactly who was present for each of those movements, the data alone can't tell us whether the same people were on board the whole evening or whether passengers came and went between trips. That's a real gap. It means this data, valuable as it is, still needs to be paired with actual testimony to become a complete picture, rather than replacing that testimony outright. Still, what this data does is something no witness account, on its own, could ever fully provide. It gives this case a fixed, objective skeleton, a timeline that isn't up for debate the way memory is. Every account given so far can now be measured against it. Does a friend's recollection of when the boat left match the 4:31 timestamp? Does anyone's story account for that second trip into Fort Bayou? Those questions weren't answerable a week ago. Now, at least in principle, they are. That shifts the nature of this investigation from one built almost entirely on competing memories toward one that finally has a reference point everything else has to line up against. Now to the second major development this week, one that's less about mechanical data and more about process, pressure, and a family that has decided not to simply wait quietly for updates. For the first time since Nolan's body was recovered, Christine and Elmore Wonsley sat down directly with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath and members of her office. Attorney Ben Crump, alongside members of the family's legal team, described the meeting as respectful. According to Crump, the central takeaway was this: once the Sheriff's Department finishes its investigation, the case will be turned over to a grand jury. It's worth being precise about what that actually means, because this detail has been misunderstood in a lot of places online. A grand jury referral in Jackson County is standard procedure for unnatural or suspicious deaths. It is not by itself confirmation that criminal charges are coming. District Attorney McElrath has said as much directly, telling reporters that authorities have not indicated this is being treated as a criminal investigation at this stage, and that her office doesn't want to rush to judgment or speculate. She's also been clear that this case remains a priority for her office. Both of those things are true at the same time, and it's important not to collapse them into a single, more dramatic-sounding claim. Crump described the meeting itself as candid on both sides. He said he stressed to the DA that he wants both her office and the Sheriff's Department to investigate this matter thoroughly and without holding anything back. He also said Nolan's parents shared something more personal during that meeting: their own lived experience with how, in their view, people in the South are sometimes investigated differently depending on who they are. By Crump's account, this wasn't presented as a demand for the DA to simply agree, but as an attempt at mutual understanding that both sides agreed to keep working on. Alongside that official process, the family has built a substantial investigation of their own. Attorney Eric Hertz is leading that effort, working with a team that includes former law enforcement and federal agents. Hertz has said his office is receiving somewhere between 50 and 100 calls a day from people who were on Horn Island themselves or who know people who were. He made a point worth remembering. Some of those callers, he said, aren't willing to talk to local law enforcement directly. His team's stated goal is to get those people connected with investigators rather than simply holding on to information themselves. Running two investigations side by side like this, an official one and a well-resourced private one, isn't common, but it isn't unheard of either in cases represented by attorneys with this kind of national reach. The upside, in theory, is redundancy. If a witness is uncomfortable approaching local police directly for whatever reason, having a separate, credible channel available increases the odds that real information actually gets captured somewhere instead of being lost entirely. The risk, which Crump himself has acknowledged, is that two separate investigative tracks can end up producing two separate, occasionally conflicting sets of information that then have to be reconciled before any of it becomes useful to a grand jury. One of the more concrete outcomes to come out of the DA meeting involves Nolan's phone specifically. Both sides agreed to a joint, simultaneous inspection, the family's own experts and the district attorney's team examining the device together at the same time. so that everyone sees exactly the same data extracted the same way. Hertz is helping lead that process, working alongside former law enforcement experts brought in specifically for the download. This directly addresses a concern that had been raised earlier in this case, that the phone hadn't formally reached investigators through a single, agreed-upon process, with the family's side and law enforcement's side potentially looking at it separately. A joint inspection closes that gap. In practical terms, when two different parties examine a piece of digital evidence separately before agreeing on shared access, disputes tend to follow almost automatically. Arguments over chain of custody, over whether anything was altered, over which side's findings should actually be trusted. A simultaneous joint inspection sidesteps nearly all of that. Both sides see the same data, pulled the same way, at the same moment, with no opening for either party to later claim the other's process was incomplete or compromised. For a case that has already generated significant dispute over a single piece of evidence, that kind of procedural clarity is worth something on its own, regardless of what the phone ultimately reveals. This next part deserves real attention, because it involves walking back one of the most emotionally powerful claims this case has produced. At an earlier press conference, Crump had said that Wells could be heard on a viral video, recorded near the island, demanding his phone back, specifically saying, "Give me my phone." "What are you doing?" He argued that detail raised serious questions about how Nolan's phone ended up in someone else's possession, and for a stretch of days, that claim became one of the emotional centers of gravity for the entire case. It was repeated at press conferences, cited by commentators, and treated by a large part of the public as close to settled fact. Since then, that account has been directly disputed. Triseston Shepard, a friend who was on Horn Island that day, came forward publicly and said the voice on that recording wasn't Nolan's at all. It was his own. Shepard said he'd gotten into an unrelated disagreement earlier that afternoon, and that the yelling captured on video had nothing to do with Nolan or his phone. He said he was coming forward specifically because of the real-world consequences the speculation was having. Friends connected to the video, he said, had started receiving death threats over a moment that, according to him, didn't even involve the person everyone assumed it did. Another friend, Javon Williams, had separately told a reporter before Shepard came forward that he didn't believe the voice matched someone standing on the shore, and thought it sounded more like it was coming from someone on a boat. An account that, once Shepard identified himself, lined up with what Shepard was describing. Asked directly about this contradiction, Crump's response was notably more careful than his original claim. He said that's what a witness had told his team at the time, and that's what they reported publicly. Since then, he said, another witness had come forward disputing it, and his team now has audio experts working to determine, as definitively as possible, whose voice is actually on the recording. As of right now, that technical question remains unresolved. Going forward, Crump said, his team will be more careful to describe claims as coming from a specific witness rather than presenting them as already confirmed. This matters, and it's worth being direct about why. It doesn't mean nothing happened on that video, and it doesn't mean the video is irrelevant to the investigation. But it does mean that one specific, emotionally powerful claim, that Nolan himself could be heard demanding his phone back, was disputed by a named witness and is no longer being presented with the same certainty it originally was. That's a meaningful correction, and it's one worth carrying forward into how the rest of this case gets discussed and understood. There's a broader thread running underneath all of this, and it's one Crump addressed directly at this same press conference. How much misinformation has attached itself to this case, and how difficult that's become to manage. Asked about a widely shared photo his team had reposted online, showing what some viewers interpreted as evidence related to the case, Crump said, reposting content isn't the same as authenticating it, that his team labels reposts as reposts, and shares material specifically to generate tips, not to assert confirmed facts. He also spoke about the human cost of that misinformation with real, visible frustration. Friends connected to this case, he said, have received death threats. AI-generated videos have specifically targeted Christine Wansley, fabricated footage attacking a mother who is simultaneously grieving her son and preparing to bury him. Crump called it, in his own words, god-awful. and said nobody's life should be threatened in the pursuit of the truth. This tension is genuinely difficult, and it's worth naming honestly, rather than pretending there's an easy resolution to it. A legal team trying to solve a case this complicated legitimately needs public information, and casting a wide net for tips is a reasonable way to surface witnesses who might otherwise stay quiet. But that same wide net inevitably pulls in false claims, fabricated content, and secondhand rumor right alongside anything genuinely useful. And sorting the two apart in real time, under this level of public attention, is exactly the pressure this legal team has been operating under since this case first went national. There's also a specific procedural frustration the family raised directly. Under Mississippi law, crime victims are entitled to receive an incident report within a set window of time. That window had already passed by the time of this meeting, and the family still hadn't received the report. Part of the purpose of sitting down with the district attorney was to actually start obtaining that document, along with other basic information the family felt they should already have had. Asked whether they'd received it by the end of the meeting, the answer was simply, not yet. Christine Wansley spoke candidly about how communication with law enforcement had actually been going, and it wasn't an encouraging picture. She said the district attorney's office has now agreed to take over primary communication with the family going forward, in part because they have a dedicated victim advocate on staff, something she said she genuinely appreciated. But she was honest about how things had felt up to that point. The last time anyone from the sheriff's department had reached out to her directly, she said, had been the previous Tuesday, and even that had only been a text message she herself had sent, simply asking for an update. Sit with that for a moment. More than a week into an active investigation into her own son's death, in a case that has drawn national civil rights figures, celebrity funding, and sustained national media coverage, the direct line of communication between this grieving family and the agency responsible for finding out what happened to their son had, by her own account, largely gone quiet. Whatever the underlying reasons for that gap, it goes a long way toward explaining why this family felt the need to build an entirely separate channel for gathering information, rather than simply waiting on updates that weren't reliably coming through. The same week that brought all of this also brought details a lot of people had been waiting on with real dread: when and how this family will finally lay their son to rest. Funeral services are set for Monday, July 20th, at Center Point Church in Ocean Springs. Visitation runs from 9 to 11 that morning, with the service immediately following. Christine has said she wants the day to center on celebration rather than mourning. "He would not want us just sitting around crying," she said. A repass, framed as a celebration of his life, is planned afterward at the Jackson County Fairgrounds, and the family has said media will be allowed to attend that portion as well. Coaches and former teammates spanning Nolan's time in middle school, high school, and college have specifically been invited. There's something worth noticing in how this family has chosen to handle the funeral itself, opening it to media, inviting a wide circle of people from every stage of Nolan's athletic life, and building the day around celebration instead of retreat. That's a deliberate choice, and it reflects the same instinct that has shaped this entire case from the very beginning. Christine and Elmore have consistently chosen visibility over privacy, even when that visibility has cost them directly, in the form of online harassment, fabricated videos, and constant public scrutiny over their son's final hours. Choosing to keep even his funeral open to that same public attention, rather than retreating completely at the one moment most families would want total privacy, says something about how strongly this family believes that staying visible is their best path toward real answers. Christine has publicly thanked several people who've helped carry the family through these past 2 weeks. Filmmaker Tyler Perry is covering funeral costs. Colin Kaepernick helped fund the independent autopsy. Reverend Al Sharpton has agreed to officiate the service. Perry has spoken about his own reasons for stepping in, describing a nephew who died in a Louisiana prison under circumstances he still has questions about, and separately helping another mother pursue answers about her own son in Florida. He's described the agony of not having answers as debilitating, which reframes his involvement here as something more specific than simply attaching a well-known name to a high-profile cause. He's speaking from direct personal familiarity with the exact kind of prolonged uncertainty this family is living through right now. Away from the legal and forensic details, two of Nolan's football coaches shared their own memories this week, and the picture they described matched everything his family has said publicly about who he was. Irvin Moore, the team's wide receivers coach and general manager at Southwest Mississippi Community College, remembered Nolan's official recruiting visit and how he made sure his younger brother got to be fully part of that moment, watching him try on the team uniform for the first time. Head coach Les George described him simply: he was a genuine person, the kind who wants to see the good in everyone and make other people feel accepted. George recalled Nolan getting no playing time during the team's season opener and still celebrating that win as enthusiastically as anyone else on the roster. Someone, in George's words, who never seemed to have a bad day, regardless of what he might have actually been carrying. Both coaches described meeting with Nolan regularly, not just as a player they managed, but as someone they'd built a real relationship with over time, which matters, because it means this wasn't generic praise for a kid they barely knew. It was a specific, consistent portrait built from real time spent together. So, stepping back, what does all of this actually add up to? The GPS data gives this case its first genuinely objective anchor point. It confirms the broad outline of when the boat left the island, while surfacing a completely new, unexplained thread, that second and third movement of the boat that evening, which nobody has publicly accounted for yet. It formally connects an adult, the boat's owner, to the official record in a way that doesn't depend on any single family member's claim, and it shifts the burden of explanation in a real way. Before this data surfaced, questions about that evening could be met with a shrug or a claim of not remembering clearly. Now there's a specific, time-stamped sequence that whoever was involved will eventually have to account for, to investigators, to a grand jury, or simply to the public record. What it doesn't do is answer the central question at the heart of this entire case. It doesn't tell us what happened to Nolan in the hours before he ended up in the water. It doesn't resolve the dispute over the video. It doesn't confirm or rule out anything about intent, or about what was actually said between him and the friends who left without him. What it gives investigators and the public is a hard, unimpeachable starting point, something that isn't anyone's word against anyone else's, and a brand new lead that deserves a real direct answer. Meanwhile, this family is doing something that's genuinely difficult to hold at the same time. Planning a funeral for their 18-year-old son while simultaneously building and pursuing an independent investigation into exactly how he died. Most people, faced with a loss this sudden, would understandably step back entirely and let an official process run quietly in the background while they focus only on grieving. Christine and Elmore have chosen a harder path, showing up to press conferences, meeting directly with prosecutors, building an investigative team of their own, all while planning to bury a son they never imagined burying at 18 years old. None of what we've covered today amounts to a resolution. The cause of death still hasn't been officially determined. The independent autopsy results haven't been released. The question of who was actually on that boat during its unexplained evening trips remains open. What this week added wasn't an answer, it was documentation. Real, time-stamped, independently verifiable documentation in a case that has, for weeks, been built almost entirely out of dueling memories and disputed claims. We'll continue following this case as that unexplained trip into Fort Bayou gets addressed, as the joint phone inspection moves forward, as both autopsy results are finally released, and as this investigation continues toward a grand jury. We'll bring you what's actually been confirmed, from named sources and not a moment before that. If you have verified information relevant to what happened on Horn Island on July 4th, both the Jackson County Sheriff's Office and the family's independent investigative team have asked that you come forward directly rather than posting speculation online. Real information helps. Unverified guesses, however well-intentioned, don't. If this update helped you actually understand where this case stands right now, subscribe to True Crime Vault so you don't miss the next one, and let us know in the comments what you think that unexplained second boat trip might mean. We'll see you in the next update.